In just over 2 weeks' time, we will be out of the EU and free to negotiate our own trade deals with the rest of the world, or at least those countries that don't already have trade deals with the EU. The United States, we're told by the Foreign Secretary, is poised at the doorstep, pen in hand, ready to sign a deal. Today, the man who used to sit with him around the cabinet table, the man whose job it was to prepare the ground to strike those trade deals, is calling for a shake-up in Whitehall to ensure that it seizes the opportunities that lie ahead. Liam Fox is due to say that the civil service has a deep antipathy to the whole concept of disengaging with the EU. The former Defence and International Trade Secretary joins us in the studio. Morning to you.
Good morning.
What is going to be possible on February the 1st, after Brexit, that wasn't possible when you were in the Department for International Trade?
So up to the point that we actually leave the European Union, we're bound by what's called our duty of sincere cooperation with the European Union. That means we can't negotiate new trade agreements outside the EU. Now, of course, departments have been planning for this, preparing for this, as other countries have done. We've had some trade working groups with the United States that have been working, for example, towards this end. We've had our public consultations, which are part of the process we have to go through for new trade agreements. But, as you correctly say, on the 1st of February, we will actually be able to begin negotiations on our own behalf for the first time since we went into the European Union.
In a moment, let's talk about where we are with those possible trade deals. But I'm struck by the message in your speech today, that phrase that the civil service has deep antipathy to the whole concept of disengaging with the EU. Are you suggesting that Whitehall is deaf to the opportunities or is actively blocking them?
No, I think that what you've got is a culture that's developed over more than 40 years, where we look to the European Union, we look to European Council meetings, we look to leaders' summits for the traction for Britain's activity in the world. And I think that free from those limitations, we now need to be able to deliver and develop our own levers for how we increase British influence. And that comes into trade, because I think it means that we need to be out there ensuring we've got a global footprint that's big enough. And in terms of our foreign and diplomatic presence, you have to remember that you're comparing a Foreign Office budget of about £1 billion to cover the entire world compared to 14 billion for our overseas development program. That's not to say, and I don't believe that that is something we should be reducing. I think we should be very proud of our record on development, but we need to recognise that our footprint could be better used.
So you argue in the speech you're going to give that the Department for International Development should be scrapped or at least merged perhaps with the Foreign Office. You're not quite comparing like to like, are you? In the sense that the DFID budget is grants. It's money that is being given to the very poor people around the world that we say that we want to help. Whereas the Foreign Office budget is an administrative budget. These are not similar budgets.
Well, they're not. But can a country have two foreign policies effectively? No, they can't. And
you say that that's what we do have now?
Well, it is noticeable when you go to Africa, for example, that entirely understandably they want to talk to DFID, not the Foreign Office, because that's what carries the budget. And I think that we could use them more effectively. And by that I mean that you can look at the number of so-called platforms, i.e. the bases that we have geographically around the world. You can get more efficiency in that. But I think you can look at it the other way around too. The Foreign Office could use some of those independent platforms that DFID have to increase its footprint, because I think that if you want to have global Britain, which is a very noble aim for us, you need to ensure that that has the sufficient resources. And the Foreign Office has, I think, been downgraded in importance over too many years at a time when we want to increase Britain's influence and certainly our unique voice when we leave the European Union. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office needs to have a bigger footprint.
By the sound of it, that is talking about merging functions and bases and staff and so on. But do you go further and say, no, look, aid should be linked to trade? We should say to countries, not least in Africa, that's growing very fast, many of the countries, you don't get the aid unless you deliver trade with Britain.
No, we've never said that, and that's not been part of the British approach. I think it's certainly possible to better align our trade and investment policies with our overseas development policies. For example, if we can help countries by bringing in British investment to add value to their primary produce, we can take advantage of the trade and development alongside our freedom to bring in a different tariff policy. So you can do that, but I think you also need to better align our foreign policy aims with how we operate our development policy.
What do you say to those who say, look, this is frankly all a huge diversion from the fact there is less free trade going to be happening after Brexit, after February the 1st, because the government has withdrawn voluntarily from the body that has free trade deals around the world. Now, you did your best to roll over lots of the deals that the EU has, that Britain is part of, but you didn't manage to do them all, did you?
Well, some of them can't be done. If you look, for example, at Turkey, which is in a partial customs union, it's not technically possible to do that. And what Turkey decides to do once we've left the EU is a matter of some conjecture and considerable importance.
But as a result, we will have less free trade, less free trade with the rest of the world after Brexit, in the immediate aftermath, than we do in the EU.
No, and what we must be doing is to stop this ridiculous focus on trade as being, quote, trade deals, and recognise that what we really need to do is to improve our global footprint so that we give better help to British exporters. Now, we think there are tens of thousands of British companies that could be exporting who are not doing so. We need to increase our people in the field, because if you want to sell Britain abroad, you have to do two things. Number one, understand the market you're selling into, and that requires more people who are specialists in those markets overseas, and it also means understanding what Britain is able to sell, i.e. in our sector teams back in the UK. So both of those need to improve if we're to give the sort of help to our exporters that say the French or the Germans give.
Let's turn to one specific, and the one that's the real prize for Boris Johnson. Dominic Raab, as I say, told MPs this week that the United States was on the doorstep, pen in hand, ready to sign a trade deal. We read in the Times today something that's not frankly very surprising, that what the Americans are likely to do is to say, if you want this, we will demand that. There will be a whole series of unattractive demands made in that trade deal. And given that we're so desperate for it, we're not in a very good and strong position to resist, are we?
Well, I'm afraid that the debate has been a barren one. It's talked purely about FTAs, free trade agreements. A lot of what we've already been able to do is done through things such as mutual recognition agreements, where we look at the professional qualifications and get access for our service sector into the US. That was actually one of the ones that we did was for Scottish Chartered Accountants, for example.
Just to be clear, you're saying there are things that we can do to enhance trade that don't involve a headline shake of the hand between Donald Trump and Boris Johnson.
Exactly, and there are a lot of things, for example, in the service sector that we would do at state level, not at a federal level in the United States. And I hope the debate will now mature into these other areas rather than just talking about headline FTAs.
Would Harry and Meghan make a great British export?
Well, I think they have done wonderfully. Of course, their story has been very widely covered in North America, as you would expect. I'm one of those who actually wishes them well. I think if they want to do something different, then that's something that should be respected, and good luck to them.
Now, more seriously, as a former Defence Secretary, you will have been taking a great interest in what's been happening in Iran. In the last few minutes, the Prime Minister has said, let's dial this thing down. Shouldn't more hawkish people, and I think you'd probably refer to yourself as a hawk, certainly as a conservative in American terms, shouldn't you be patting Donald Trump on the back for taking out what American television called the world's #1 bad guy, rather than seem to tick him off for doing it?
Well, the United States has a right to self-defense, as the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have both acknowledged. What we do need with Iran is to understand its aims, which is wider regional dominance. We also need to enter into what Iran itself called earlier the grand bargain, which is not just about Iran's nuclear program. It's about its behavior. It's about the conduct of proxy wars in Yemen and Syria. Its involvement with Hezbollah, with the militia in Iraq, and to get a wider agreement. My disagreement over the Iran nuclear deal was that it simply wasn't wide enough, and that it wasn't going to be able to deliver what either the West or Iran wanted. So in that sense, yes, when the Prime Minister talks about dialing down, I think that's about how we get to a wider regional agreement that deals with those other issues, and not the very simple issue of Iran's nuclear deal, which I think created an agreement where Iran was never even going to get, in terms of trade, what it thought it was going to get originally.
So I think you're saying, are you, that the Trump idea of a wider deal to replace the Obama nuclear deal, a deal that deals with Iran's behaviour in the region as a whole is a good thing. But in order to have any chance of delivering it, the UK now needs to stand with the EU and say, dial it down, calm it down, let's not have a confrontation.
Well, we all want to see de-escalation, but you've still got a regime that is behaving in an appalling way internationally, and its activities need to be dealt with as and when they occur.
But the government, Boris Johnson, just to be clear, should back a new deal and accept that Donald Trump has and is intent on ripping up the old one.
I think the Iran nuclear deal, whatever we think about it, was never going to be viable once the United States withdrew from it. If we can take part in a wider deal that deals with the security issues of our allies as well as Iran's more toxic activities, then that's a plus for all of us.
Liam Fox, thank you for coming in.